The harsh winter wind carried Delia Morgan's letter across the prairie, fluttering in the breeze like a white flag of surrender. She chased after it desperately, her boots sinking into the mud as she reached for her last hope, a response from a man who'd chosen her from nothing but a black and white photograph and a few carefully penned words. Montana Territory, 1878. Delia had never imagined she would end up here. A mail-order bride stepping off a train into a frontier town that seemed to consist of little more than a handful of wooden buildings arranged haphazardly along a single dusty street. Whitefish, Montana looked nothing like the bustling Pennsylvania town she'd left behind. The air smelled different here, crisp, clean, tinged with pine and possibility. She clutched her small valise tighter, scanning the platform for the man who was supposed to be her husband-to-be. The other passengers dispersed quickly, leaving her alone with the station agent, who cast occasional curious glances in her direction as he sorted through mail sacks. "Excuse me," she finally asked, approaching his window. "I'm looking for Mr. Yates Blackwood. He was meant to meet me." The agent looked up, adjusting his spectacles. "Blackwood's ranch is about 10 miles outside town, probably got held up with his cattle. Spring's a busy time." Delia's heart sank. After 3 days on various trains, she had hoped for a warm welcome, not another delay. "Is there somewhere I might wait? An establishment where a lady could try Hannigan's Hotel?" the agent interrupted, pointing down the street. "Tell Martha I sent you. She'll fix you up until Blackwood shows." With a nod of thanks, Delia picked up her bag and made her way into town. The boardwalks were uneven, and she carefully navigated around puddles from a recent rain. Hannigan's Hotel was a 2-story wooden structure with peeling white paint and a crooked sign. Not exactly the accommodations she was accustomed to, but beggars couldn't be choosers, and Delia Morgan was most certainly a beggar now. The woman behind the desk, Martha, presumably looked up as Delia entered, bell jingling overhead. "Help you, miss?" "I hope so." "The station agent suggested I wait here. I'm meeting Mr. Yates Blackwood." Martha's eyebrows shot up. "You're his mail-order bride?" Delia winced at the term but nodded. "Well, I'll be," Martha muttered, giving Delia an appraising look. "You're prettier than your picture, I'll give you that." "You've seen my photograph?" Delia asked, startled. "Whole town has. Yates carried it around for weeks after it arrived, asking everyone if they thought you'd be suited to ranch life." Martha chuckled. "Poor man was nervous as a cat in a room full of rocking chairs." Delia didn't know whether to feel mortified or touched that her future husband had sought so many opinions. "And what was the verdict?" Martha shrugged. "Some thought you looked too fine for frontier life, delicate-like." She studied Delia's gloved hands and neat traveling suit. They might have had a point. Before Delia could respond, the hotel door banged open. A tall man in a dust-covered duster stood in the doorway, hat in hand. His face was tanned from the sun, with lines around his eyes that spoke of long days squinting at the horizon. His hair was the color of wheat, though in need of a trim, and his eyes, a startling blue, fixed immediately on Delia. "Miss Morgan?" he asked, his voice deeper than she'd imagined from his letters. She nodded, suddenly unable to speak. "I'm Yates Blackwood." He stepped forward, extending a hand that was calloused and strong. "I apologize for not meeting your train. Had some trouble with rustlers last night." Delia placed her gloved hand in his. "It's quite all right, Mr. Blackwood. I've only just arrived." He held her hand a moment longer than necessary, studying her face with an intensity that made her cheeks warm. "You look different than your photograph." Her stomach dropped. "Is that disappointing?" A slow smile spread across his face, transforming his weather-beaten features. "No, madam." "Not disappointing at all," Martha snorted behind the desk. "For heaven's sake, Yates, tell the girl what you mean before she thinks she's made a terrible mistake." He ducked his head, suddenly boyish despite being a man of at least 30. "What I mean to say, Miss Morgan, is that your photograph didn't do you justice. Not by half." Relief washed over her. "Thank you, Mr. Blackwood." "Yates," he corrected. "If we're to be married, you ought to call me Yates." "Delia," she offered in return. They stood there awkwardly for a moment, two strangers contemplating a lifetime together based on a handful of letters and a photograph. "I've got a wagon outside," Yates finally said. "If you're not too tired from your journey, we could head to the ranch now." Or if you prefer, you could rest here and we could leave in the morning." The thought of spending the night alone in this unfamiliar town made Delia's decision easy. "I'd prefer to go now, if that's all right. I've been sitting on trains for days. I'd welcome some fresh air." Something like approval flashed in his eyes. "I'll get your bags then." As they stepped outside, Delia got her first real look at the wagon, a simple but sturdy conveyance with two strong horses hitched to it. A rifle was secured beneath the seat, and various supplies were loaded in the back. Yates helped her up onto the high seat, his touch gentle but firm. Once settled beside her, he clicked to the horses and they pulled away from the hotel. "I should warn you," he said as they left the town behind, "the ranch isn't what you might be used to back east. It's a working cattle operation." "Not fancy." "I didn't come west expecting luxury, Mr. Yates," she corrected herself. "I came for a new beginning." He glanced at her, curiosity evident. "Your letters didn't say much about why you wanted to leave Pennsylvania." Delia looked out at the vast landscape unfolding before them, rolling hills giving way to distant mountains, the late afternoon sun casting long shadows across the land. "There wasn't much left for me there," she said simply, unwilling to delve into the painful details of her family's financial ruin following her father's death, the subsequent loss of their home, and the dismal prospects for a young woman with no fortune and no connections. "Well," Yates said after a moment, seeming to understand her reluctance, "Montana's a good place for new beginnings." As they traveled, Yates pointed out landmarks: a creek where the fishing was good, a valley where wildflowers would bloom in summer, distant peaks still capped with snow. Delia found herself relaxing in his company. His letters had revealed an educated man with a straightforward manner, and in person, he seemed much the same, though considerably more handsome than she had dared to hope. The sun was setting by the time Yates turned the wagon down a long drive. "Welcome to the Double B," he said as a collection of buildings came into view. The main house was larger than Delia had expected, a two-story structure built of sturdy logs with a wide porch wrapping around the front. Several outbuildings, corrals, and a large barn completed the scene. "It's lovely," she said sincerely. Yates looked pleased. "Been working on the house for the past year since I wrote to you first. Wanted it to be proper for a lady." The thought of him laboring all this time, preparing a home for her, touched Delia deeply. That was very thoughtful. As the wagon pulled up to the house, the front door opened and an older woman emerged, wiping her hands on an apron. "That's Mrs. Abernathy," Yates explained. "She's been cooking and keeping house for me since I started the ranch 5 years ago. Lives in town but stays here during the week." The woman hurried down the steps. "About time you got back, Mr. Blackwood. I was beginning to think you'd missed the train entirely." Her gaze fell on Delia and her expression softened. "You must be Miss Morgan. I'm Alina Abernathy. Pleased to meet you, Mrs. Abernathy," Delia said as Yates helped her down from the wagon. "I've got supper keeping warm and made up the guest room," Mrs. Abernathy continued, ushering them toward the house. "Figured the young lady would want her own space until after the wedding." Delia felt her cheeks flush at the frank mention of sleeping arrangements, but was grateful for the older woman's practicality. Yates, she noticed, looked equally uncomfortable. "That's very considerate, Mrs. Abernathy," he said, carrying Delia's valise into the house. The interior was simply but comfortably furnished, with a large stone fireplace dominating the main room. Polished wooden floors gleamed in the lamplight, and curtains framed the windows, touches that spoke of Mrs. Abernathy's influence, Delia suspected. "Your room's upstairs, first door on the right," Mrs. Abernathy told her. "Why don't you freshen up while I put supper on the table?" Grateful for the chance to collect herself, Delia followed directions to a pleasant bedroom with a brass bed covered in a colorful quilt. A washstand with a pitcher and basin stood in one corner, and a simple dresser in another. Someone, Mrs. Abernathy, presumably had placed a small vase of early spring wildflowers on the windowsill. Delia washed her face and hands, smoothed her hair, and changed into a fresh blouse, keeping on her traveling skirt. As she made these preparations, the reality of her situation struck her anew. She was in a stranger's home, preparing to marry a man she had only just met in person. The thought was both terrifying and exhilarating, When she descended the stairs, she found Yates waiting for her at the bottom. He'd removed his duster and hat, revealing a clean blue shirt beneath his vest. His hair was damp, suggesting he'd washed up as well. Mrs. Abernathy's beef stew is the best in the territory, he said, offering his arm to escort her to the dining room. Hope you're hungry. Dinner was indeed delicious, with fresh baked bread and apple pie for dessert. Conversation flowed more easily than Delia had expected with Mrs. Abernathy, filling any awkward silences with local gossip and stories about the ranch's early days. Mr. Blackwood here rode into Whitefish with nothing but his horse, saddle, and the clothes on his back, she told Delia. Now look at him, finest cattle ranch in the county. Yates looked embarrassed. Hardly the finest, Mrs. Abernathy. False modesty doesn't become you, the older woman chided. Tell Miss Morgan how you built this place up from nothing. As Yates reluctantly shared the story of how he'd worked as a ranch hand, saved every penny, and eventually purchased his own land, Delia found herself increasingly impressed. This was a man who had made his own way in the world, much as she was attempting to do now. After dinner, Mrs. Abernathy shooed them into the parlor while she cleaned up. Young folks should have time to get acquainted, she said firmly. Alone with Yates, Delia felt suddenly shy. He seemed to share her discomfort, standing awkwardly by the fireplace. Would you like to see the rest of the house? He finally asked. She nodded, grateful for the suggestion. As he led her through the rooms, Delia noted thoughtful touches throughout, bookshelves filled with volumes in the study, a piano in the corner of the parlor, windows positioned to catch the best light. Do you play? She asked, gesturing to the piano. Yates shook his head. My mother did. I had that shipped out from St. Louis last year, thought you might. Well, your letters mentioned you enjoyed music. The fact that he had remembered such a detail from her letters and gone to the expense of providing a piano moved her deeply. I do play, though I'm out of practice. My family had to sell our piano before I left. He looked pleased. Then it's yours now. When they returned to the parlor, an awkward silence fell again. Delia sat on the sofa while Yates took a chair opposite. I should tell you, he began, that Reverend Miller can marry us on Sunday if that suits. It's 3 days from now, gives you some time to change your mind if you wish. Delia blinked in surprise. Are you having second thoughts, Mr. Blackwood? Yates, he reminded her gently. And no, I'm not, but I want you to be sure, this isn't what you're used to. Life out here is hard, especially for a woman. His consideration touched her. I appreciate your concern, but I made my decision before I boarded that train. I'm not one to turn back once I've set my course. Something like admiration flickered in his eyes. That's a good quality to have out here. They talked a while longer, sharing details that hadn't made it into their correspondence. Delia learned that Yates had come west after the war, where he'd served with the Union Army despite being from Virginia originally. He'd been just 17 when he enlisted, lying about his age. Lost my taste for the South after what I saw, he said simply. Wanted open country and a fresh start. In turn, she told him about growing up in Pennsylvania, daughter of a professor who valued education for his children regardless of gender. My father made sure I could manage accounts and read contracts as well as play the piano and pour tea, she explained. He believed women should be prepared for more than just marriage. Sounds like a wise man, Yates commented. Those skills will serve you well on a ranch. As the evening wound down, Mrs. Abernathy appeared to announce she was retiring to her room at the back of the house. Don't stay up too late, she admonished, though her tone was kind. Miss Morgan must be exhausted from her journey. Indeed, Delia found herself stifling yawns despite her interest in the conversation. Yates noticed immediately. I've kept you up too long, he said, rising from his chair. You should rest. Tomorrow, if you're feeling up to it, I can show you around the ranch. At the foot of the stairs, they paused. Delia wasn't sure what to expect, a handshake, a kiss. But Yates simply took her hand and squeezed it gently. I'm glad you're here, Delia, he said, his voice low. Sleep well. Good night, Yates, she replied, surprised by how natural his name felt on her lips now. In her room, Delia sat on the edge of the bed, overwhelmed by the day's events. The man she had agreed to marry was not what she had expected. He was better, in ways she hadn't anticipated. Kinder, more thoughtful, certainly more handsome. But as she prepared for bed, doubts crept in. What did she really know about Yates Blackwood? What did he know about her? They were strangers bound by a few letters and a photograph, about to pledge their lives to one another. Yet as she drifted off to sleep in the unfamiliar bed, the sound of the wind in the pines outside her window, Delia couldn't help but feel a flicker of hope. Perhaps this leap of faith would lead to something real, something lasting. Morning came with the crowing of a rooster and the smell of coffee and bacon wafting up the stairs. Delia dressed quickly in a practical skirt and shirtwaist, pinning her hair in a simple style that would stay neat throughout the day. Downstairs, she found Mrs. Abernathy bustling around the kitchen and Yates already seated at the table, a cup of coffee in hand. He stood when she entered, that same appreciative look in his eyes. "Good morning," he said. "Sleep well?" "Very well, thank you," she replied, taking the seat he pulled out for her. Mrs. Abernathy placed a plate of eggs, bacon, and biscuits in front of her. "Eat up, Miss Morgan. Ranch days start early and run long." Over breakfast, Yates outlined his plans for the day. "Thought I'd show you around the place, introduce you to the hands. We've got 5 men working here full-time. They've got a bunkhouse behind the barn." "I'd like that," Delia said, eager to see the operation she would soon be part of. After breakfast, Yates brought around 2 horses, his own chestnut gelding and a gentle-looking bay mare. "This is Penny," he said, patting the mare's neck. "Thought she might suit you. She's steady but has some spirit." Delia approached the horse, offering her palm for the mare to sniff. "She's lovely." She was grateful now for the riding lessons her father had insisted upon when she was younger, another impractical skill that might prove valuable in her new life. Yates looked relieved when she mounted smoothly without assistance. "You ride well," he observed, swinging up onto his own horse. "My father believed a woman should be able to ride as well as she dances," Delia explained, "though I'm out of practice." Yates led her first to the barn and corrals where several cowboys were working with horses. He introduced each man, and Delia did her best to remember their names: Dave, the grizzled foreman; young Bobby, barely 20 but skilled with horses; Miguel, whose quiet competence seemed to earn him Yates's particular respect; brothers Thomas and Joseph, who had been with the ranch since its beginning. The men were polite if somewhat awkward around her, clearly unaccustomed to a lady's presence. But their respect for Yates was evident, and they seemed genuinely pleased to meet his bride-to-be. From there, they rode out to see the cattle, Herefords primarily, with some mixed breeds. Yates explained his breeding program and his plans to expand the herd, speaking with such enthusiasm that Delia couldn't help but be drawn in. "What do you think?" he asked as they paused on a ridge overlooking a valley where several dozen cattle grazed. Delia took in the scene: the cattle, the distant mountains, the endless sky. "It's beautiful," she said honestly, "all of it." His smile was warm, "Not all beautiful. Wait until you've been through a Montana winter or helped with branding, or I don't expect it to be easy," she interrupted gently. "But there's beauty in building something worthwhile, isn't there, even when it's difficult?" Yates studied her face for a long moment. "Yes," he finally said. "There is." They continued their tour, stopping by a creek for a simple lunch that Mrs. Abernathy had packed. Sitting on a fallen log, sharing bread, cheese, and apples, Delia felt more at ease with Yates than she had with anyone in a long time. "Tell me about your family," he said as they ate. "Your letters mentioned parents, but not much else." Delia hesitated, then decided honesty was the best foundation for their future. "My father was a professor of literature. My mother died when I was 12, influenza. It was just father and me after that." She paused, the familiar pain of loss washing over her. "He passed away last year, heart failure." "I'm sorry," Yates said, and she could tell he meant it. "After he died, I discovered he had debts I knew nothing about. The house, his books, everything had to be sold to satisfy the creditors." She looked down at her hands. "There was nothing left for me, no family to take me in, no prospects for employment that would allow me to support myself respectably. And so you answered my advertisement," Yates concluded quietly. Delia nodded. "It seemed practical. A solution that might benefit us both." "Practical," he repeated, a slight furrow between his brows. "Is that all it was?" She looked up, meeting his gaze. "Your letters showed intelligence and decency. You offered partnership, not just marriage." That's more than many women get, even with so-called love matches. Yates seemed to consider this. And now that you're here, now that we've met, the question hung between them, weighted with possibility. Delia chose her words carefully. I think. I think we might have the makings of something good, something real, if we're willing to work at it. His expression softened. I'm willing if you are. The rest of the day passed in comfortable companionship as Yates showed her more of the ranch the vegetable garden misses. Abernathy tended the orchard he'd started 2 years ago, the creek that provided water year-round. By the time they returned to the house in late afternoon, Delia's muscles ached from the unaccustomed riding, but her mind was alive with possibilities. She could see herself here, working alongside Yates, making this place a true home. The next 2 days fell into a similar pattern. Delia spent mornings with Mrs. Abernathy, learning the rhythms of the household, while afternoons were devoted to exploring the ranch with Yates. Each evening, they sat in the parlor after dinner, talking until the fire burned low. She learned that he had a dry sense of humor that emerged when he was relaxed. He discovered her passion for books when he found her exploring his small library. They shared stories from their pasts, his adventures as a young cowhand, her school days in Pennsylvania. On Saturday evening, the night before they were to be married, Yates surprised her after dinner by asking Mrs. Abernathy to give them some privacy. Once they were alone, he retrieved a small wooden box from his desk. I have something for you, he said, sitting beside her on the sofa. A wedding gift. Delia opened the box to find a simple gold band nestled on a bed of velvet. Beside it lay a brooch of Montana sapphires arranged in a delicate floral pattern. The ring was my mother's, Yates explained, his voice soft. The brooch I had made in Helena last month, after your last letter confirmed you were coming. Touched beyond words, Delia ran a finger lightly over the jewels. They're beautiful. The color reminds me of your eyes. He looked pleased and slightly embarrassed by the comparison. There's something else I wanted to say, something important before tomorrow. Delia closed the box carefully and gave him her full attention. When I sent for a bride, he began, I was thinking practically, like you said. A ranch needs a woman's touch. I needed a partner, someone to help build this place into something that would last. He paused, seeming to gather his thoughts. But when your photograph arrived with your first letter, something changed. Changed how? Delia asked, her heart beating faster. Your eyes, he said simply. Even in that black and white picture, there was something in your eyes that seemed to see right through me. Intelligence, yes, but kindness too, strength. He took a breath. I carried that photograph everywhere, not just to show people, but because looking at it gave me hope. Hope that you might be someone I could not just partner with, but care for, deeply. Delia felt tears threatening. And now that the real woman is here, not just the photograph, Yates took her hand, his calloused fingers warm against hers. The real woman is far more than I dared to hope for. He looked down at their joined hands. I know we've only known each other a few days, and I don't expect you to feel the same yet, but I wanted you to know before we speak our vows that, for me, this isn't just practical anymore. I think I could love you, Delia Morgan. I think maybe I already do. Tears spilled over then, and Delia made no attempt to hide them. I came here expecting a business arrangement, she admitted. A marriage of convenience. I never imagined I might find someone who could make my heart beat faster just by walking into a room. Yates's eyes widened. Does that mean it means, she interrupted gently, that I think I could love you too, Yates Blackwood, given time? His smile was radiant. Slowly, giving her every chance to pull away, he leaned forward and pressed his lips to hers in a kiss that was both gentle and full of promise. When they parted, Delia felt as though something fundamental had shifted between them. This was no longer an arrangement, a practical solution to their respective problems. It was the beginning of something deeper, richer, and infinitely more precious. Until tomorrow, then, Yates said softly, helping her to her feet. Until tomorrow, she agreed. Sunday dawned clear and bright, as if nature itself approved of their union. Delia dressed in her best gown, a blue silk that brought out the color of her eyes and Mrs. Abernathy helped arrange her hair, tucking sprigs of early wildflowers among the dark curls. You make a beautiful bride, the older woman said, her usually brisk manner softening. Mr. Blackwood is a fortunate man. I'm the fortunate one, Delia replied, thinking of all Yates had already given her: a home, a future, and the promise of love. The ceremony took place in Whitefish's small church, with Mrs. Abernathy, the ranch hands, and a few townspeople as witnesses. Reverend Miller spoke of partnership and devotion, of building a life together on foundations of respect and affection. When Yates slipped his mother's ring onto her finger and promised to cherish her all the days of his life, Delia believed him with her whole heart. And when she spoke her own vows in return, she meant every word. The wedding breakfast that followed at the ranch was a joyous affair, with Mrs. Abernathy outdoing herself preparing a feast. The ranch hands presented them with a handcrafted rocking chair for the porch, and even Martha from the hotel came out to offer congratulations and a set of embroidered pillowcases. As the celebration wound down and guests began to depart, Delia found herself standing on the porch with her husband, watching the sun begin its descent toward the mountains. "Happy, Mrs. Blackwood?" Yates asked, his arm around her waist. The name sounded strange but wonderful to her ears. "Very happy, Mr. Blackwood." He pressed a kiss to her temple. "Good, because this is just the beginning." And as they stood there, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of gold and pink, Delia knew he was right. This was just the beginning of their story, a story that had started with a photograph and a few letters, but would continue with something much deeper and more lasting. Love, freely given and gratefully received. The weeks following their wedding unfolded in a rhythm that became increasingly familiar to Delia. Mornings began early, with Yates often out before dawn to work with the cattle. She would rise soon after, helping Mrs. Abernathy prepare breakfast and learning the intricacies of managing a ranch household. Their evenings were precious time together, sometimes spent in conversation, sometimes in comfortable silence as Delia sewed or Reed and Yates worked on accounts or plans for the ranch. And their nights. Their nights were a discovery of intimacy that left Delia breathless with wonder at the depth of connection possible between two people. As spring bloomed fully into summer, Delia found her place on the ranch. Mrs. Abernathy taught her to make soap from beef tallow, to preserve vegetables from the garden, to bake bread in the temperamental oven. Yates showed her how to shoot a rifle, just in case, he said, how to tell a healthy calf from a sickly one, how to predict weather from the way the wind shifted. She took over the household accounts, organized supplies, and began corresponding with other ranchers' wives to establish connections in the area. The piano that Yates had so thoughtfully provided became a source of joy in the evenings, with Delia playing songs from memory while Yates listened, a look of contentment on his face that made her heart swell. It wasn't all easy. They had their disagreements: Delia's insistence on ordering books when money was tight, Yates's tendency to make decisions without consulting her, both of their stubborn streaks that occasionally clashed. But they learned to navigate these conflicts, to find compromises, to respect each other's perspectives. One evening in late June, as they sat on the porch watching fireflies emerge in the gathering dusk, Yates turned to her with an unusually serious expression. "I need to ride to Helena next week," he said. "Business with the bank and the cattle broker. I'll be gone about 10 days. Delia nodded, trying to hide her disappointment. They had not been separated since their wedding. "When will you leave?" "Monday morning early." He took her hand. "I don't like leaving you." "I'll be fine," she assured him, squeezing his fingers. "Mrs. Abernathy will be here, and the hands are just behind the barn if I need anything." Yates looked relieved. "I've asked Dave to check on you daily, and Miguel will handle any repairs needed while I'm gone." The week passed quickly with preparations for Yates's journey. Delia packed food for the trail, mended his shirts, and tried to memorize every detail of his face, his hands, his voice. The morning of his departure arrived all too soon. Standing in the yard as the first hint of dawn colored the eastern sky, Delia handed him the last of his provisions. "Be careful," she said, trying to keep her voice steady. Yates pulled her into his arms, uncaring of the ranch hands preparing their own horses nearby. "I'll come back to you as soon as I can," he promised, his lips brushing her forehead. "You'd better," she managed, forcing a smile. I have plans for that south pasture I want to discuss, he laughed, some of the tension easing from his shoulders. Always full of ideas, my Delia. He kissed her properly then, a kiss that left her both breathless and blushing at its public nature. I love you, he said, the words still new enough between them to make her heart skip. I love you too, she replied, meaning it more deeply with each passing day. Watching him ride away with two of the hands accompanying him, Delia felt an emptiness she hadn't expected. In just a few months, Yates Blackwood had become essential to her happiness in a way she never could have anticipated when she first saw his advertisement for a bride. The first few days of his absence passed uneventfully. Delia kept busy with household tasks, spent time in the garden, and rode Penny around the nearby pastures each afternoon. Dave checked in faithfully each morning, and Mrs. Abernathy provided company during the day, but the nights were lonely. The bed felt too large without Yates's solid presence beside her, and the house too quiet without his deep voice or the sound of his boot heels on the wooden floors. On the fourth day after Yates's departure, Delia woke to the smell of smoke. Alarmed, she dressed hastily and rushed downstairs to find Mrs. Abernathy already in the kitchen, peering out the window. Wildfire, the older woman said grimly. Over by Elk Creek looks like. Delia joined her at the window. In the distance, she could see a plume of smoke rising against the clear blue sky. How far away is that? 10 miles, maybe less. Winds blowing it northeast, away from us for now, but if it shifts. Mrs. Abernathy didn't need to finish the thought. Dave arrived shortly after, his expression grim. Fire's moving fast, jumped the creek already. I've sent Bobby to alert the neighboring ranches. We need to prepare just in case. The next hours were a flurry of activity. The men moved the cattle to the farthest pasture, away from the fire's path. Delia and Mrs. Abernathy packed essential documents, photographs, and valuables into crates that could be loaded quickly if evacuation became necessary. By afternoon, the smoke had thickened, casting an eerie orange glow over everything. Ash began to fall like dirty snow, coating the yard and buildings. The horses in the corral grew restless, sensing danger. Mrs. Blackwood, Dave called, striding toward the house. Winds shifted. Fire's heading this way now. Delia's heart raced, but she kept her voice calm. What should we do? We need to create a fire break, he explained. Plow a wide strip of bare earth around the main buildings. Might save the house and barn, at least. Tell me what you need from me, Delia said. Keep wetting down the roof and walls of the house. Have Mrs. Abernathy ready to evacuate if I give the word. He hesitated. Wish the boss was here. He isn't, Delia said firmly, but we'll manage. As Dave left to organize the men, Mrs. Abernathy appeared beside Delia. Girl's got spirit, she commented, handing Delia a bandana to cover her mouth and nose against the smoke. The next hours were a blur of activity and fear. Delia and Mrs. Abernathy worked with buckets, soaking the roof and walls of the house while the men plowed furrows around the buildings and cleared brush that might feed the flames. By nightfall, the fire was visible on the horizon, a terrifying wall of orange advancing steadily toward the ranch. The air was thick with smoke, making breathing difficult despite the bandanas. Mrs. Blackwood, Miguel called, leading Penny and another saddled horse to the front of the house. Dave says you and Mrs. Abernathy should go now while there's still a clear path to town. Delia looked at the house, the home she and Yates had begun to build together, and shook her head. I'm staying. Delia, Mrs. Abernathy began, using her given name for the first time. Be sensible. I am being sensible, Delia insisted. These men need every pair of hands I can help. You should go, Mrs. Abernathy. Take the valuables we packed. The older woman studied her face for a long moment, then nodded. You're a stubborn one. Mr. Blackwood chose well. She squeezed Delia's hand. Be careful. As Mrs. Abernathy rode toward town, Delia turned back to the task at hand. Throughout the night, they fought the approaching fire, digging additional fire breaks, wetting down buildings, moving livestock to safety. Near dawn, when Delia's arms ached and her lungs burned from the smoke, the wind shifted again. Gradually, the wall of flame that had threatened to engulf the ranch began to move parallel to it instead, skirting the property to the east. By mid-morning, it was clear the immediate danger had passed. The fire continued to burn, but it was moving away from the Double B. The ranch had been spared, though fields of grass were scorched and the air remained thick with smoke. "We were lucky," Dave said, his face blackened with soot as he accepted a cup of coffee from Delia. "Real lucky." "Not just luck," she replied, looking around at the exhausted men who had worked through the night to save the ranch. "Hard work and determination." Dave's weathered face cracked into a tired smile. "Boss is going to be proud when he hears how you handled yourself, Mrs. Blackwood." Delia felt a flush of satisfaction at the praise, but more than that, a deep gratitude that they had been able to save Yates's home their home. If the ranch had been lost, she pushed the thought away, it hadn't been lost. They had fought for it and won. The next few days were spent assessing damage, helping neighboring ranches that hadn't fared as well, and continuing to monitor the fire as it burned itself out against natural barriers to the east. On the 10th day after Yates's departure, the day he was expected home, Delia waited anxiously, scanning the horizon for any sign of riders. By evening, with no appearance, worry began to gnaw at her. Had something delayed him? Had he run into trouble on the trail? Or worse, had he somehow encountered the fire on his return journey? She slept poorly that night, tossing and turning with terrible visions of Yates trapped by flames or lying injured somewhere between Helena and home. Morning brought no relief, but as Delia was helping Mrs. Abernathy, who had returned after the fire danger passed, prepare breakfast, the sound of hoofbeats in the yard sent her rushing to the door. 3 riders approached, and Delia's heart leaped as she recognized Yates's broad-shouldered figure in the lead. Without regard for propriety, she lifted her skirts and ran to meet him. Yates dismounted in a fluid motion and caught her in his arms, holding her so tightly she could barely breathe. He smelled of dust and horses and the particular scent that was uniquely his, and Delia buried her face against his chest, sudden tears stinging her eyes. "Thank God," he murmured into her hair. "When we saw the burnt land, heard about the fire, I was afraid." "We're all right," she assured him, pulling back to see his face. "The ranch is safe." The relief in his eyes was palpable. "Dave rode out to meet us, told me what happened, told me how you refused to leave." His expression was a mixture of pride and exasperation. "You could have been killed, Delia." "I couldn't leave our home," she said simply. "Not without trying to save it." Yates shook his head, a smile tugging at his lips despite his obvious concern. "My brave, stubborn wife." He kissed her then, a kiss that spoke of fear conquered and love deepened by separation. Later, after Yates had cleaned up and eaten, they sat together on the porch, his arm around her shoulders as he filled her in on his business in Helena. "The bank approved the loan," he told her. "We can buy the Petersons' land that adjoins our north boundary, more water access, better grazing." "That's wonderful," Delia said, genuinely pleased. The expansion had been a dream of Yates's since before she arrived. "And I brought something for you," he added, reaching into his pocket. "Meant to be a surprise, but after what happened with the fire, seems even more fitting now." He handed her a small velvet pouch. Inside, Delia found a delicate gold locket on a fine chain. "Open it," Yates urged. Inside the locket was a miniature version of her photograph, the one that had brought them together, facing a new photograph of Yates that must have been taken in Helena. "So we're always together, even when we're apart," he explained, a touch of self-consciousness in his voice. "And to remember how this all began." Delia felt tears threatening again. "It's perfect," she whispered, letting him fasten the chain around her neck. The locket nestled against her heart, a tangible symbol of their journey from strangers to lovers. "I missed you," she admitted, leaning against his shoulder, "more than I expected to." Yates pressed a kiss to her temple. "I missed you too, couldn't sleep properly without you beside me." As they sat together watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of pink and gold, Delia marveled at how far they had come in such a short time. From a black and white photograph and a few cautious letters to this deep, abiding love that seemed to grow stronger with each passing day. "What are you thinking?" Yates asked, noticing her contemplative expression. Delia smiled, fingering the locket at her throat. "I'm thinking about choices, how you chose me from a photograph but I chose you from life, and how grateful I am for both those choices." Yates's arm tightened around her. Best decision I ever made, sending for that bride catalog. Best decision I ever made, answering your advertisement, she countered, turning to kiss him softly. As twilight deepened around them, Delia knew with absolute certainty that whatever challenges lay ahead, fires, harsh winters, financial setbacks, or any of the myriad difficulties of ranch life, they would face them together. Two people who had taken a chance on each other and found, against all odds, a love worth fighting for. The summer passed in a blur of activity. After the fire, there was much to be done: fences to repair, burnt pasture to assess, arrangements to make for winter feed since some grazing land had been lost. The Petersons' land acquisition added to the workload, but also to the ranch's prospects, with its reliable spring and sheltered valleys. Delia threw herself into ranch life with increasing confidence. She learned to make decisions in Yates's absence, earned the respect of the hands, and began to develop friendships with neighboring women. Letters from her few remaining acquaintances in Pennsylvania went unanswered as her old life receded further into memory. By early fall, when the aspen trees turned golden and the nights grew crisp, Delia had news she could no longer keep to herself. She chose an evening when the day's work was done, and she and Yates sat before the fireplace, his head in her lap as she read aloud from a new novel that had arrived on the last mail coach. Closing the book mid-chapter, she ran her fingers through his hair, smiling as he looked up in mild protest. "Getting tired?" he asked, reaching up to touch her cheek. "No," she said. "Just thinking that we should perhaps consider turning the small room next to ours into a nursery." It took a moment for her meaning to register. When it did, Yates sat up so quickly he nearly fell off the sofa. "Delia. Are you saying?" She nodded, unable to contain her smile. "The baby should arrive in early spring, March, I think." "A baby," Yates repeated, his expression a mixture of wonder and alarm. "My God, are you certain?" "Quite certain," she assured him, taking his hand and placing it on her still flat abdomen. "Mrs. Abernathy confirmed it. She's delivered more babies than the doctor in town." A slow, radiant smile spread across Yates's face. "A baby," he said again, this time with pure joy. "Our baby." He gathered her into his arms, careful despite her protestations that she wasn't fragile. "You've made me the happiest man in Montana Territory, Delia Blackwood." The months that followed were a time of preparation and anticipation. Yates insisted on hiring additional help so Delia could rest more, though she laughed at his overprotectiveness. "Women have been having babies since the beginning of time," she reminded him, "usually while continuing to work the fields or tend the home." Nevertheless, she appreciated his concern, especially as winter settled over the ranch and her condition became more apparent. The room next to theirs was transformed into a nursery, with a cradle Yates crafted himself and a rocking chair moved from the parlor. Christmas brought a heavy snowfall that isolated the ranch for nearly 2 weeks. Delia, now visibly carrying their child, found the enforced quiet a blessing. She and Yates spent peaceful evenings planning for the baby's arrival, choosing names: Daniel for a boy, after her father, Sarah for a girl, after Yates's mother, and sharing hopes for their child's future. "I want our child to have your kindness," Yates said one night as they lay in bed, his hand resting on the swell of her belly, "and your intelligence." "And I want our baby to have your strength," Delia replied, covering his hand with hers, "and your integrity." As winter gave way to the first tentative signs of spring, Delia's time drew near. Mrs. Abernathy moved into the ranch full-time, preparing for the birth with practical efficiency that helped calm Delia's occasional nerves. The labor began on a clear March morning, just as the snow was beginning to melt from the south-facing slopes. Yates, who had barely left Delia's side for the past week, was sent from the room by Mrs. Abernathy, who tolerated no male presence during birthing. "Go see to your cattle," she ordered. "This will take time and you'll only be in the way." Banished to the barn, Yates paced like a caged animal, alternating between prayer and profanity as the hours passed. The ranch hands gave him a wide berth, understanding his distress. Inside the house, Delia worked through her labor with the same determination she'd shown during the fire. Mrs. Abernathy's capable hands and calm instructions guided her through the pain and exhaustion. As the sun began to set, painting the snow-covered landscape in shades of pink and gold, a new cry joined the sounds of the ranch, the lusty wail of a newborn taking its first breath. "A girl," Mrs. Abernathy announced, placing the swaddled infant in Delia's arms, strong and perfect. Tears of joy streamed down Delia's face as she beheld her daughter for the first time. The baby had a dusting of dark hair like her own, and when she briefly opened her eyes, a hint of Yates's startling blue gaze. "Let him in now," Delia said, eager to share this moment with her husband. Yates burst into the room moments later, his face drawn with worry until he saw Delia's radiant smile and the bundle in her arms. He approached the bed almost reverently, sinking to his knees beside it. "Meet your daughter," Delia said softly, tilting the baby so he could see her face. "Sarah Eleanor Blackwood." "Eleanor," Mrs. Abernathy repeated, pausing in her cleanup of the birthing room. "After the woman who helped bring her into the world," Delia explained, "if that's all right with you." The older woman blinked rapidly, turning away to hide her emotion. "It's a fine name," she said gruffly. Yates seemed unable to speak, his eyes fixed on his daughter's tiny face. When he finally looked up at Delia, there were tears on his cheeks. "She's beautiful," he whispered, "like her mother." Carefully, with obvious trepidation, he accepted the baby when Delia offered her. His large, calloused hands cradled his daughter with infinite gentleness, and something in Delia's heart expanded at the sight. "Hello, little one," he murmured. "I'm your father." In that moment, watching her husband hold their child, Delia felt a completeness she had never known was possible. From the ashes of her old life, something new and precious had emerged: a family, a home, a love that seemed to grow stronger with each passing day. The years that followed brought both joys and challenges. Sarah grew into a spirited child with her father's blue eyes and her mother's determination. When she was 2, a brother joined the family, Daniel Yates Blackwood, born during a summer thunderstorm that broke a month-long drought. The ranch prospered under Yates and Delia's joint stewardship. They weathered hard winters, dry summers, fluctuating cattle prices, and the 1,000 natural shocks that agricultural life was heir to. But through it all, their partnership, begun as a practical arrangement between strangers, remained the bedrock of their existence. On their 5th wedding anniversary, as they sat on the porch watching their children play in the yard, Yates presented Delia with a package wrapped in brown paper. "What's this?" she asked, surprised. They had agreed to forego gifts, with cattle prices down and a new roof needed for the barn. "Open it," he urged, a smile playing around his lips. Inside, Delia found a framed copy of her original photograph, the one she had sent with her first letter, the one that had started their journey together. "I had it copied in Bozeman," Yates explained. "Wanted you to have a reminder of how this all began." Delia traced the edge of the frame, studying her younger self. The woman in the photograph looked serious, a bit sad perhaps, her future uncertain. How different from the woman she was now, surrounded by love and purpose. "Do you ever regret it?" she asked, looking up at her husband. "Choosing a bride from a catalog, taking such a risk?" Yates shook his head, his gaze warm as it held hers. "Never, not for a single moment." He took her hand, his thumb brushing over the gold band he'd placed there 5 years earlier. "Best gamble I ever took." Delia leaned against his shoulder, watching as Sarah helped Daniel toddle across the yard, the little girl's protective instinct toward her brother already evident. "I came west expecting a marriage of convenience," she mused. "I never imagined." "What?" Yates prompted when she trailed off. She turned to him, her heart full. "I never imagined I would find a love story." Yates's arm tightened around her and he pressed a kiss to her temple. "That's exactly what we found, Delia, our own love story." As the sun began to set behind the mountains, painting the sky in familiar shades of gold and pink, Delia silently blessed the courage that had led her to answer an advertisement, to board a train to an unknown future, to take a chance on a stranger who had chosen her from a photograph. For Yates had indeed chosen her from a photograph, selecting her image from among many possibilities. But Delia had chosen him from life, from the reality of the man he was, not just the promise in his letters. And in that mutual choosing, that leap of faith taken by two people seeking connection in a vast and often lonely world, they had found something rare and precious. A love that would endure, as vast and enduring as the Montana sky above them, for all the days of their lives. Look. Sarah called, pointing toward the horizon where the first stars were beginning to appear. Make a wish, Mama, Delia smiled, meeting Yates's gaze over their daughter's head. I already have everything I could wish for, she said softly. And as night settled over the Double B ranch, as lamps were lit and children tucked into bed, as husband and wife retired to the room they had shared for 5 years of marriage, Delia knew it was true. From the most practical of beginnings had grown the most profound of loves, a love chosen, tested, and proven true through all the seasons of their lives together. A love that had begun with a photograph but had blossomed in the fertile soil of shared experiences, mutual respect, and daily choices to put each other first. A love that would continue to grow and deepen through all the years to come. For that was the true miracle of their story. Not that a cowboy had chosen a bride from a photograph, but that two people reaching across distance and difference had found in each other exactly what they needed, not just a partner, but a soulmate. Not just a marriage, but a love story for the ages.